Hi, my name is Conrad Birube. I am the Executive Director of Bees for Babar, which is a development organization which provides hive building materials for subsistence farmers around the area of Mole Park as both an income generating activity and as a means of creating live barbed wire fences to keep elephants from destroying the crops of the local farmers. This video is going to be somewhat of a departure because I'm not going to talk at all anymore about beekeeping and simply going to concentrate on a bit about the animals of Mole Park. Mole National Park covers about 70 square kilometers, and you can arrange for car tours or walking tours of the park in the northern savanna region of Ghana to view some of the approximately 300 different species of birds which occupy the park, or the about a third as many mammal species. The park has basic accommodations and a restaurant, and you can get there easily by bus. On my latest trip, I stayed for about a month in the small village of Magnori, which is right on the border of the park, from whence I saw this pied crow, which is basically a small raven that looks like it's wearing a dapper little white vest. I'd see these regularly around the village because they would tend to feed on food waste around the village, but they also wouldn't stick around long because the small boys would shoot their slingshots at them, because the crows will also prey on the young poultry around the village. I'm not a bird guy, so I don't know the exact identity of a number of the species I observed, such as this, what I'm pretty sure was some kind of a dove species. And I wasn't using a tripod, so a number of the shots are going to be somewhat shaky because the birds were far, far away, and I don't have the most surgeon-like of grips. The guides around the park are really good and will be able to tell you in a glance what the various species are, but these shots I took while I was out walking around on my own, and like I said, I have no idea what these birds are. This, I believe, is an African gray hornbill, but if you have a better idea, feel free to post the minutes and seconds in on the comments with your identification, and that would be great. I'll post it. Okay, this one I have no idea what it is, but it was a species that was fairly comfortable around humans because I took this shot quite close to the village. I'd imagine either the bird is too small to be hunted or too fast to be hit by a normal slingshot. Actually, you know what? It looks kind of, no, I don't know. Finch? Who knows? If you do, like I say, post a comment. If you are not a birder either, well then, this is the legendary African swallow. Yeah, that's it. Which can fly at speeds in excess of 50 kilometers an hour when unencumbered by a coconut, but whose airspeed velocity drops down to approximately 12 kilometers an hour when carrying a large coconut. Yeah. Okay, there's only a few more pretty bird shots of species that I wasn't able to identify, and then we'll get into some of the animals that I actually know what they are, and we'll be able to pass along some a little more informative tidbits. This, don't know what it is. Perhaps it's a species totally unknown to science, in which case I will call this Lansborough's white-bellied shrike, because it sounds good. Lansborough's white-bellied shrike is known to perch high in trees from whence it can be photographed from far away. Okay, here's a species that I was actually able to find something about. This is the orange weaver finch, Ploceus aurantius, which I am told prefers to found its colonies near human habitations because it is afforded some degree of protection there from predaceous species, because the village children will drive predators away so that they don't attack the local poultry and such. Here you can see a decent shot of the globular woven nests that the male birds built. These were in a tree that was just festooned with the nests that was just outside the compound where I was staying in Magnori. These shots were taken in March of 2012, and it must have been during the mating season because the bright orange coloration of the male's chest feathers apparently turns a drabber brown color during non-mating season. I like these little guys. They used to make quite a bit of noise early in the morning when they were starting their shift to go forage for small seeds and insects. But they must not have been very good to eat, or the villagers might have appreciated their coloration as well, because the villagers didn't seem to molest them for any reason. Perhaps the villagers just appreciated the splash of colors that the finches added to the local environment, which probably also contributes to the fact that this particular species of finch is often kept as a house pet. With that, we leave the orange weaver finch to observe what I believe is the African pied hornbill, Tockus fasciatus, which is Latin for fast ass. Okay, I just made that last part up, but what I was actually able to find out was that they share a nesting behavior very similar to wood ducks, in that they will nest in a tree cavity and block up the entrance with a cement-like daub of mud, leaving a hole only so big as to allow the male to bring food to supply the young chicks. These are red-throated bee-eaters, Merops bullocki. As their name implies, these birds live primarily as insectivores, meaning they eat insects, particularly honeybees. And as a beekeeper, I should probably be irritated by that, but look at how beautiful they are. These birds, because of their colorful plumage, are quite easily identified, and I would presume are very often driven away from beehives by local villagers, because I never saw any of these close to the village, and was only able to observe them in Mole Park. They are fast, straight-flying birds when going after their prey, which they catch on the wing, which they then stun by swiping against their perch before swallowing to avoid being stung. These are, of course, one of the signature species of Africa, the cattle egret. But I was surprised to discover that the cattle egret has actually been either intentionally or otherwise introduced to the New World and has been observed as far north as Canada on occasion. The scientific binomial for the cattle egret is Bubulcus ibis. Bubulcus is Latin for herdsman, which of course refers to its close association with bovine species. It feeds on insects and small vertebrates disturbed by the passing of herds, and will also feed on the ticks and flies that pester cattle. Cattle egrets will often be found in wetland areas where they feed on the abundant insect life found there, both aquatic and adult stages, and will also feed on the fish and amphibians found in such habitats. In addition, they seem quite content to be able to scrounge and scavenge off of human refuse heaps, much like seagulls. They are gregarious and colonial nesters, often aggregating in groups as large as 10,000 individuals. Okay, on to mammals now, like the western hartebeest. The herds, comprised usually of females and young, can move at up to 80 kilometers per hour. The males are quite territorial and will defend their areas quite rigorously. Google antelope versus mountain biker for a spectacular demonstration of this. Another much more common antelope species found in Mole Park is the cob, whose scientific name is, quite imaginatively, Kobus cob. The cob is about 2/3 the size of the western hartebeest, standing about 1 meter tall at the shoulder and weighing about 90 kilograms, a little over 200 pounds. In contrast to the hartebeest, in which both males and females are horned, only the males of the cob have horns. Cobs prefer to herd near permanent water sources, and where the terrain is relatively flat and open, which allows them to keep an eye out for predators and to attempt a quick escape if one is observed. Although in form, the cob and hartebeest and other antelopes may resemble deer, they are in fact more closely related to cows and other bovines. One of the distinguishing features of this bovid family is the possession of horns, which are living bone projections covered by keratin, which is the same protein from which hair and fingernails are made of. The branched antlers of deer and their kin, on the other hand, are grown and shed annually. At any rate, much like members of the deer family, the antelopes use their headgear both for protection from predators and for intraspecies competition. That is, the males will butt heads to establish and defend territory to attract mates. Another antelope species easily observed in Mole Park is the waterbuck, Kobus ellipsiprymnus, which, as its scientific name implies, is closely related to Cobus cob. As seen here, waterbuck often frequent mudflats where they graze on grasses and reeds, and from which they can usually flee into water to protect themselves from predators. Their shaggy, rather elk-like coats are protected by an oily waterproofing. Unless skinned carefully, the oily secretions in the animal's sweat glands can taint the meat, which makes it a relatively unpopular game animal in those areas where hunting is still allowed. Note again that the females do not have horns, and the harem to which they belong is defended by a single male, often, as seen here, being the last to leave the field when the herd is moved from its territory by a perceived danger. As Mole Park is about 70 square kilometers, grazing animals are in no real danger of being harried away from suitable forage by tourists. The bushbuck, Tragelaphus scriptus, is yet another antelope species found in Mole Park, and is about the size of Kobus cob. It stands at the shoulder just short of a meter and weighs about 40 to 80 kilograms. This tolerance to human proximity may also translate into fearlessness. Wounded bushbuck have been known to hide and then gore and kill hunters stalking them. Such dangerous inclinations are related to the territoriality that males display. Such territoriality precludes enclosing antelopes together for the purposes of domestication because the males would fight each other to the death. Several other factors, such as their skittish tendency to panic when confined, and their ability to leap over all but the tallest defenses, has doomed to failure nearly all attempts to domesticate antelope species, although there have been some very limited successes in domesticating the largest of the antelope species, the eland. By the way, elands have been all but extirpated from Ghana, and I don't believe there are any that exist in Mole Park. Jared Diamond, in his book Guns, Germs, and Steel, recounts the difficulties of domesticating most animal species, and in particular those in Africa. You can find a truncated version of his explanation in the documentary version of the book, and I found it online just by Googling Guns, Germs, and Steel and clicking the video button. The explanation starts about 35 minutes into the first of the 3 video presentations. And I'll put a link to that video into the descriptor for this video. Now in a second on the close-up you'll see some flies on the face of this bushbuck. Those are most probably of the species Musca sorbens. The eye-seeking flies that you see on the faces of wildlife, or humans for that matter, in Africa are most often of this species and can transmit diseases such as trachoma, an inflammatory eye disease which can lead to blindness. Because these flies prefer to breed in isolated feces, the construction of latrines can reduce their prevalence around villages. Unlike the eye-seeking flies, which feed primarily on mucal discharge, biting, blood-feeding species of flies of the genus Glossina, known commonly as the tsetse fly, can transmit trypanosome blood flukes, which cause the disease known as sleeping sickness, or ngana. Many species of wildlife are resistant to this disease, whereas domestic cattle are not. So, ironically, the tsetse fly may be, in part, responsible for helping to preserve the habitat that the wildlife of Mole, such as this green vervet monkey, need from encroachment by cattle grazing. Alright, so much for my little entomological diversion. Let me get back to wildlife fun facts. This, as I mentioned before, is a green vervet monkey, which is a generalist feeder and almost as omnivorous as humans are. This probably contributes to its widespread distribution and its successful introduction to several Caribbean islands, to such an extent that it has even become an agricultural pest in some of these locations. Another primate with similar habits to that of the vervet is the olive baboon. The scientific name, Papio annubis, refers to the Egyptian jackal-headed god. The Egyptians had quite a fondness for, metaphorically, lopping the heads off various species of wildlife, putting them on the bodies of humans, and calling them gods. The Egyptians had a number of minor gods who were portrayed either as baboons or as baboon-headed humans. But as I mentioned, this species of baboon is named after Anubis, who is an Egyptian god with the head of the feral dog known as the jackal. The Egyptians knew perfectly well that such hybrid creatures didn't actually exist. I mean, not in the sense that you'd expect to see a guy with the head of a jackal or the head of a baboon walking around in the marketplace. Anyway, the observation of baboons probably contributed significantly to the prevalence of stories of dog-headed men in the accounts of ancient European travelers. Like the vervets, baboons have cheek pouches inside their dog-like muzzles, which allow them to store food gathered quickly off the ground to be consumed later from a safer perch if they are forced to retreat from the feeding area. Troops of baboons will forage together in all levels of their habitat. They'll feed on fruit and some young leaves in trees, gather seed or eat insects, or even hunt smaller mammals on the ground, and will even dig underground for succulent tubers. Greedily tearing up pot scrapings, this female demonstrates that they are also shameless scavengers. For this reason, they spend a lot of time hanging around near the quarters of the park staff, a habit which they share with the warthog, Cocos africanus. Although they are relatively tolerant to the presence of humans, that's a human there on the left, not a brightly colored warthog, they can be quite violent, and in fact the warts for which they are named are subcutaneous pads of fat on the faces of the animals, which help to protect them from injury during the head-flailing fights which might erupt over females or food. Warthogs have the amusing habit of rooting or grazing on their knees, which are heavily padded by callus for this purpose. Here you can see a pretty good shot of the animal's tusks, which are used for digging and, as mentioned before, in combat. Warthogs aggregate into small groups known as sounders, generally composed either of bachelor males or females and their young. When the males reach mating age, they tend to become more solitary. Warthog mating occurs during a specific rutting season, during which time males will attempt to defend a specific territory or group of females, or will wander about looking for females in heat and compete with other males for mating privileges. Litters are usually composed of 4 piglets, each of which will feed from only one of the female's 4 teats. Oddly, although piglets demonstrate this peculiar teat faithfulness, females have been observed to nurse the young of other females when they lose their own young. Birthing and nursing generally occurs in the dens that the warthogs excavate using their very sharp tusks. Warthogs of both sexes tend to back into their burrows in order to defend themselves with their sharp tusks, or burst out to escape should the need arise. So now we come to the stars of the show, as far as I'm concerned, the African elephant. Elephants are highly intelligent, and are amongst the few number of species, that includes bottlenose dolphins, a few species of apes, including we humans, that can recognize their reflection in a mirror as an image of themselves. Search for mirror test on Google or YouTube for information on the topic of animal self-awareness. African elephants exist in 2 forms, both of which live in Ghana: the bush or savanna elephants, such as those found in Mole Park, and the smaller forest elephants found in areas such as the Cocos Conservation Area, far to the south from Mole, just north of Cape Coast. Many of the elephants are quite habituated to the presence of humans, and stroll about near the park headquarters, making for very exhilarating close encounters. Nonetheless, African elephants are much less amenable to taming than are Indian elephants, which, even so, are not truly domesticated and have to be caught in the wild as youngsters. This is likely the technique used by the Carthaginians and others of the ancient world to acquire their war elephants. Hannibal's elephants were probably acquired in the Atlas Mountains of North Africa. At that time, the distribution of African elephants was considerably wider than it is today. As I indicated before, African elephants are pretty ornery and don't take well to being mahooted about. Some researchers believe that the elephants needed to be plied with wine and goaded about the ankles with spears to prime them for battle. Slightly sloshed and most likely pissed off, such elephants were very inclined to turn tail and to go careening back into their own lines. To minimize such collateral damage, the mahouts were often equipped with a special weapon to drive into the spine of the elephant, felling it instantly. Their ill temper and insubordinates were only a few of the reasons why African elephants were eventually abandoned as weapons of war. They are very difficult to provision on the march due to the enormous quantities of food which they require. An adult elephant may eat over 450 kilograms of leaves, shoots, and grasses every day. Their feeding is an important factor in sculpting the ecosystem of a landscape. Their feeding on trees maintains the balance between woody and grass species that is characteristic of the savanna. Much of the material that churns through the stomach and intestines of the elephants emerges relatively undigested. Many animals, from dung beetles up to baboons, glean through the droppings of elephants for softened plant material that they would otherwise be unable to eat. When browsing on trees, elephants will often consume the seed pods thereof. The partial breakdown of the hard outer coating of some of these seeds during their passage through the elephant's digestive system actually encourages the germination of those seeds, and are further benefited by being dispersed and fertilized by the elephant's droppings. The dense concentration of succulent cultivated crop plants in farmlands can represent a near overwhelming temptation to the pachyderms. The placement of beehives on such farmlands has been shown to be highly effective at repelling elephants from cultivated areas. The organization Bees for Babar provides Rotary credit to villagers to install hives around subsistence farms near the Mole Wildlife Reserve. When the elephants attempt to raid crops, they will upset tripwired hives. The bees will drive off the elephants, preserving both the crops and the elephants, who might otherwise be poached by enraged farmers. It has even been shown that elephants can recognize beehives, and that even empty bee boxes can act as a deterrent to the jumbo snack seekers. On the topic of human-elephant encounters, I relate this closing story. I stumbled, naked, out of my tent at the break of dawn one morning to take a leak, to find that a large bull elephant was peacefully grazing only yards away. Even though the air was warm on my nude skin, I began to shiver uncontrollably. Except for the shivering, I stood stock still while the great beast eyed me up and down. The great animal took a few steps towards me, looked down, squinted, and said, "How the hell do you breathe out of that thing?" And then he just quietly marched away. For more information, search YouTube or Google Bees for Babar, or visit beesforbabar, all one word, .org. And thanks for watching. Bye!